أصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on Usul Fiqh. Last week we were discussing the issue of the categories, the ahkam at-taklifiyya, and we summarized them in the handout. And this week, inshallah ta'ala, in the group I posted the next handout, which has to do with the adillah, the evidences. And what we're looking at today is the evidences in Usul Fiqh. So what are the evidences the ulama they use when they're determining Usul Fiqh, or determining the rulings, where they derive the principles and the rulings from? So these are the adillah. And so if you think about Usul Fiqh in categories, the first subject we did was introduction, then we went into the different types of ahkam, at-taklifiyya wal-wad'iyya. Then we went into the ahkam at-taklifiyya, the 5 categories, wajib, mustahab, or mandub, mubah, makruh, and muharram. And now those are the rulings in which we're going to derive. All the rulings we're looking for, either something is wajib, obligatory, recommended, mustahab, or mubah, permissible, or makruh, disliked, or muharram, haram, something permissible. So the ahkam, the rulings, are very important because these are the ones that we're going to give the conclusion to. This is what the ruling is. But where do you get these rulings from? This is the subject for today. Where are we getting these from? So to understand this, then the ulama, they spend a lot of time understanding the adillah to shar'iyya, the legislative evidences. And in the handout we see they're categorized in 2. And so before going there, in Islam we have evidences which we can use to make rulings. We'll pull from these evidences to get something's wajib, obligatory or not. So the ulama say what an evidence is any type of benefit or thing that you use in order to reach an intended objective. So in this case, any source in which we're going to use to reach the hukm shar'i. So this is what it's going to be, any source we're going to use in order to establish the hukm shar'i. So if someone were to tell you something's haram, you're going to ask him, where did you get it from? You say, in the Quran. Okay, that's acceptable evidence. Sunnah, acceptable evidence. Ijma', qiyas. But if someone says, I'm going to use ra'i, my opinion, we're going to say, that's not evidence. Right? Because you have to have established evidence. Hence, the scholars divided the evidence into 2 categories. Al-adillatu al-muttafaqu alayha and al-adillatu al-mukhtalafu fiha. Evidences the ulama have agreed upon, and evidences scholars are different over. And we're going to get into each one of them. This week, maybe we'll spend more time on the ones that are agreed upon. And the reason why it's important to know this is that there's some evidences, all the ulama agree you can rely upon. And some of them, they differ based on the madhab. Or they may differ on the application of that, or the details or conditions for it. So sometimes the difference of opinion in a ruling goes back to if they agree upon evidence or not. Or they use evidence they don't agree upon. So we're going to see that in a second, the implications. But a principle we need to use, a principle in the chapter of evidences, al-aslu fil adillati shar'iyya al-umum, that the origin of legislative evidences is generality. إلا أن يدل على خصوصيتها دليل. إلا, except that, أن يدل على خصوصيتها دليل, except that there is evidence to indicate its specification. In easier terms, all evidences are considered general until proven otherwise. All evidences, you consider them general until proven otherwise. So if you find an ayah in the Quran, a hadith, authentic, you find some ijma' ulama, the rule is this is general. We're not going to specify it to some scenarios over other except for proof. So the reason why this is important is that when you can go to the Quran and Sunnah freely, again the ulama they do this to pull evidences. If someone will say, how come they're using this to establish a general ruling? Why don't you say this is specific? So they say, well, the ruling is that all evidence is general until proven otherwise. So this is helpful. Why? If I bring you an ayah, you're not going to ask me that the ayah is not evidence because it came down in the 10th century or the 5th century. Okay, yes, it did come down, but it's not going to be specific. We're going to go and say the origin is generality. Later, we may find out that the evidence is specific to other evidences, but right now we just go with that rule. So why is this helpful to know that? You can check the Quran and Sunnah freely. That's how you're supposed to do it. If someone says, go and get evidence, it already implies you can go to the Quran and Sunnah and take it. But if I told you find the evidence, and the only evidences you can use are the ones which are restricted, then we're not going to find anything, because we're going to find always something restricted. So the ulama, when they talked about this, they said that the rule is generality is more than specification. Most of the evidences in general rule is a general. So just remember that. The reason being that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to explain the religion and all of its components. Hence, the religion in generality is encompassing everything that we need, and we can use it any time and place. Now, if we go to the chart in front of us, we have two evidences, two types. Evidences scholars agreed upon, and evidences scholars differ over. And so we can see, if someone were to ask us, what are the evidences the ulama agreed upon? There are four. There are four. Number one, the Quran. Number two, the Sunnah. Number three, al-ijma' consensus. And number three, al-qiyas, analogy. These four, all four madhabs, and all the ulama agree, right, except for very few, right, but they agree that these are the evidences. The foundation of these four evidences are the Quran and Sunnah. So the Quran and Sunnah inform the consensus analogy, hence they come on the top. So Quran and Sunnah are the main evidences Allah revealed. From them we derive consensus and analogy. And we're going to look at each one of them in brief to see how they work, because each one of these evidences is its own research in terms of what is its meaning, what are its conditions, how do you use it, when do you don't use it. So we're not going to go through all of them today. We're just going to look at the ones they agreed upon, and next week we'll look at the ones they differed over. And what we'll look at is how these evidences help us form our opinions. But the ulama, when they talk about evidences, in order to really get into it, they went deep into the definitions and the types and the categories. And truth be told, some of them is not applicable to everyday fiqh. For example, some of the mabahith, the research or in the investigation underneath the title of the Quran, are aqeedah related. Like, what is the Quran, the speech of Allah, but this is the fiqh. Fiqh deals with ahkam amaliyah. So some of the ulama say, we're just going to get to the part where we need for fiqh. Otherwise, there's aqeedah issues there. So we're going to see that sometimes when you go in each of these subjects, you get away from usul fiqh to other subjects. Underneath the sunnah, you talk about hadith sahih, hadith da'if, hadith ahad, mashhur. So where are you going? You're going to ulum al-hadith. So some of the ulama say it's better we take out everything that's related to hadith and leave it to hadith studies. Whatever is related to ulum al-Quran, leave it to ulum al-Quran. Because at the end of the day, what is usul fiqh for? The rules and principles needed to derive the ahkam amaliyah. The actions of the servant, which are actions, the rulings of the actions. So the reason why that's useful, we can trim it to make it a little easier. Otherwise, sometimes the discussion is very long and it's not applicable to every scenario. Before continuing, the evidences which the scholars differ over, let's look at them for a second. I put here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, although there are more. And so here, these are called al-adillatu al-mukhtalafu fiha. The ulama differed over them in either their application or their hujjiyah, the validity. So sometimes they differ on the application of the evidence. Or number two, it's hujjiyah, its very validity. They actually differ if it's actually a proof or not. Or number three, its conditions, how to use it or when to use it. So this means that some of the evidences you can rely upon depends on your own conclusions on this matter. Some madhabs may accept an evidence and others may not. Hence that madhab, they will not use that evidence but resort to another. Hence they will have a different ruling. And you and I may resort to that evidence and therefore have a different ruling. An example would be the first one, the opinion of a sahabi. Madhab al-sahabi. The madhab or the qawl of a sahabi, is it hujjah or not? Is it proof? Some ulama say yes, the correct view it is, as we'll see. But some ulama, they say not so much. And therefore, if you don't take that opinion, you may not use that as your proof when there's no Quran or Sunnah on the topic, or ijma' or qiyas. Or even before going to qiyas, you just pull that one. For example, Imam Ahmed in his madhab, they use the Sahaba's opinion a lot. And you look at other madhabs, they don't. Imam Malik, for example, I didn't put it here as a 6, but one of their go-to is the a'mal ahl Medina, the actions of the people of Medina. We didn't put it in the list because qawl al-sahih, it's not a hujjah. It can be part of ijma', but it's not a hujjah by itself. Why? Because we know that the Sahaba or the Salaf in Medina are not the only group. There could be others who differ with them. So the reason I'm saying this, if you ever were to study the madhabs and the evidences, you can see quickly where they differed in the usul, and that will also help you know when they differed in the furu' and the subsidiary issues. I'll give examples later, you can see it very clearly. So just to read the sixth, the opinion of a companion, madhab as-sahabi, or the opinion of a sahabi. Madhab means opinion. You can say it's more than that, it's his madhab, his opinion, his actual belief that he held. Sometimes the qawl or the amal al-sahabi, they call it, or the qawl al-sahabi, or madhab al-sahabi. The second one, the legislation before us, al-shara' min qablana. So what came in the Torah or Injil, in the Zabur of Dawood, are these hujjah? For example, the stories of prophets, Allah talks about the prophets before us, they did this. He tells us in the Quran, is Allah indicating that we're supposed to follow that? Or is He just telling us a story? It's a good question. So that's one of the evidences scholars they discuss. The next one, al-istihsanu, juristic preference. When a scholar would prefer one evidence over another or an opinion of another based on certain conditions. Some ulama differ. Is that adilla, istihsan? Can you say this is preferable or this is not without evidence? We'll see later. Connectivity, al-istishab, or istishab could be translated as continuousness, to be continued. So the origin of a ruling is that it continues on its ruling until proven otherwise. Something's mubah, permissible until proven otherwise. Al-istishab. So for example, someone may say, is this thing haram? I don't have any ayah in the Quran, hadith that's haram. So asl, the origin of food and drink is halal. So this thing is halal until proven otherwise. Al-istishab. I go back to the origin. It's halal to be, from the get-go, it's halal till now. Until you take it away from its ruling. So we're going to see later, can you resort to istishab a lot? Sometimes some scholars may say, I don't have any evidence, therefore it's allowed. But some scholars say, wait, you can't always resort to it. You have to double check carefully these other evidences, as we'll see later. The one we talked about last week or the week before, al-maslaha al-mursala. Maslahat al-mursala means public interest or public benefit. So the Quran and Sunnah is silent about something, but generally they accepted the human beings can do things for their benefit, building roads and bridges and hospitals. The Quran and Sunnah doesn't tell us where to build it and how to build it, it just leaves us to the benefit. Right? So Allah wants ihsan. Allah commands us to do ihsan. So this is from ihsan, for example. So we're going to see, when do you use this? When do you go back to that proof? And the last one here, saddu dara'i', or dara'i', the blocking of the means. Saddu dara'i' means something could be by itself halal, or by itself have ruling, but it changes the ruling if it leads to something else. So sometimes the ulama may make something haram, not on clear text, but the fact that it may lead to something haram, the clear text may haram. So out of fear of going there, they block it, therefore they prohibit it. But some may say that's controversial, because its origin is halal and you said it's haram. So we always have to look at the action and what it may lead to, the action and its implications. So an example would be something that's halal, but we know people are using it for haram at a particular context. Can a fatwa say that this thing is haram now? Within that context, yes. An example would be, like when we looked at in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East prior, the ruling of a woman driving. Some will say, how is haram women to drive? Saddu dara'i'. Because in that context, and when the fatwa was passed, women didn't need to drive. They had drivers for them, chauffeurs. And for women to drive may open a door to things like haram, ikhtilat, or other things that they were not existing prior. So looking at this angle, they passed the ruling. And then when those conditions changed, they went back to another ruling. The reason I'm saying this is some people didn't even understand how the Mufti, Shaykh al-Baz, passed the fatwa. And they're thinking like, how? This is haram. It's like, you have to understand there's such thing, right? And the reason I'm saying this is because if you didn't know that or you don't agree on its application, then you can see some difference. So we'll see later, each one of these, the reason why it's different over, like we said, either its validity in the eyes of many other scholars or its application, when you can and cannot. طيب, let's go with the four that's agreed upon, because that's the most of the adilla we're going to be using. And the way to understand this is that the ulama, when they talk about each one of these four, they bring headings or masail. And these masail issues are supposed to help you understand how this evidence is to be understood and applied. So let's give some examples so we can benefit. The first thing is the Quran is the book of Allah. We all know this. Kalamullah al-Munazzal. Yani Allah revealed ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as a mu'jiza in and of itself, and to be worshipped by Allah through it. So we know the Quran is the Kalam of Allah. Nobody differed, again from the Muslims, on that. Right? The fact that it is wahi min Allah. Yes, we know the Ahlul Bid'ah, they differed in the interpretation or the definition. Leave that for a side. We're just talking about the Quran as a masdar. It is the number one source of evidence. Now, once we establish this, what does the Quran, or how do we use the Quran for evidences? The ulama said the Quran has ayat, right, 6,236 ayat, and from those ayat, there are ayat of ahkam. Now, you have to remember that the Quran has different things, ayat of ahkam, then they have the ayat to do with the aqidah or the beliefs of the Muslim, and the ahkam to do with, or ayat have to do with the stories of the past and things like this. Although you can say that you can derive from different evidences or different ayat benefits. But generally there's a genre of books called ayat al-ahkam. The ayat, the verses of rulings. What are these rulings? Allah tells us about capital or corporate punishment, rulings of business, rulings of ibadah, rulings to do mu'amalat, divorce and marriage, nikah, like this, rules. And some of the rules can be derived from ayat, not indicated or not revealed for that purpose. The summary, the Quran has ahkam. We all agree to this. So therefore, when you want to figure out something, you go to the Quran, the book of Allah. But there's something you have to know. The Quran will give you generalities or overarching principles. It's the Sunnah that's going to give you the details. So it's very important, the relationship between the Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah are both wahi. Therefore, we need both of them to understand the murad, the intent of Allah. So sometimes what happens, we may put the Quran here and the Sunnah under. Forgetting that, the Quran is explained by the Sunnah. You need both of them. And the reason why some ulama put the Quran first and Sunnah below is to do with, as we'll see in a second, authenticity. Quran is 100% authentic in terms of its transmission. Whereas the Sunnah is sahih and da'if. So some of them, because of this, said it goes under. But we need to stop there for a second. The relationship between the Quran and Sunnah is between what? Between general and specific. Between obscure at times and clarity. Between unrestricted and restricted. You need the Sunnah to give you the clarity that the Quran doesn't. Simple example. You want to establish the Salah as wajib? قال الله تعالى أقيموا الصلاة. Establish the prayer. You want to establish the time for prayer? إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا. Salah is fixed for the believers on fixed time. You want to establish the شروط الصلاة covering your awrah وثيابك فطهر. Purify your clothes. يا بني آدم خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد. You take these ayat, you get the shurut. كيفية, now how? Hadith Abdullah ibn As, 5 salah. The Prophet gave us the exact timings. Allah says the salah is a fixed time. Where is it? Hadith Abdullah ibn As. Nabi Sallallahu said Dhuhr is this time, Fajr this time. He gave us the whole 5. Clothing. Nabi Sallallahu tells us what is the awrah to cover. Allah says to make sure you cover your body. عند كل مسجد, all your body parts. But it doesn't tell us which is for men, which is for women. That's the Sunnah. Come to the masjid clean. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. One interpretation, purify your clothes from najasa. Which part? What is the ruling if I didn't? Sunnah. So Quran and Sunnah go together. So remember, the Sunnah is more specific. Quran is more general. But you need them both. You need them both. So go to the Quran to learn the rulings and the benefits, the exact evidences, as well as what we can take from the Quran in terms of what is an evidence or how to interpret evidences. Because the Quran and Sunnah are complementary, not contradictory. طيب. One of the topics that come from this now, if we accept that the Quran is the book of Allah, we have to resort to it for evidences. The Quran, when it comes to its authenticity, it's qat'i, it's absolutely definitive. So what the ulama mean by this is that the Quran is 100% authentic and mutawatir in its transmission. Means the Quran, there's no part of it where there's shak. There's no tasheeh needed. It's the book of Allah. قال الله تعالى, you cite it. Therefore, when it comes to the Quran, the ulama don't differ on that. They don't say, well, this ayah is da'if. Right? No one's going to say da'if. No. Right? We're going to say the ayah is there. The second part now, it's indications. What is the Quran telling us? That can be divided into two. And this is very important because this will help you understand how the ulama differ about the Quran to begin with. Allah is speaking to us. How do you differ? Give you an example. أقيموا الصلاة. It's clear Allah is telling us to pray the salah. Allah didn't tell us the details of it. He didn't tell us how to pray it. So what we take from this, in terms of أقيموا الصلاة, as authenticity, they say this is قطعية الثبوت, authentic in transmission. When it comes to its transmission, authentic, 100% definitive. All that means is the book of Allah. Don't worry about authenticity. Keep going. The second part is where the discussion is. What is indicating? The dalala. What's the meaning of the ayah? That can be qat'i or dhanni. If you understand this, you understand why there's the ikhtilaf in the Quran, in the tafsir and the fiqh. The dalala, the insignificance or indication of the Quran can be both speculative and definitive. How can we explain this? When Allah says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, you're never going to find an alim saying with this ayah, Wallahu a'lam, if it's in the Quran. No, that's not a faqih. That's not even a jahil, right? They won't do that, right? Unless he doesn't know the Quran, right? Doesn't be like, I don't know, I never heard the ayah. They're going to say it's the Quran, طيب. What are we differing? وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. What does thiyab mean? One opinion, clothes. Second opinion, قَلْبَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. So you see, what are they differing over now? Interpretation. في tafsir ayah. So this, the ulama say, the meanings can be qat'i or dhanni. This you have to get. If it's qat'i, means clear cut, there's no two ways about it, ijma'. We go right to ijma' usually. But when they differ on the meaning, where are we going? Ikhtilaf. That's why, one of the reasons why there's lots of ikhtilaf is there. That the ayah in the Quran is qat'i in terms of its authenticity or its thabut, قطعية الثبوت in terms of its authenticity or its transmission, and then dhanniya in terms of its interpretation. And I'm not saying that dhanni means you can't rely on it. It just means there's more than one interpretation. So when you get to the Quran, we don't talk about the Quran if it's authentic or not. Questions about the Quran surround, is this ayah clear-cut or not clear-cut? And that leads us to the next discussion, the first mabhath, muhkam wal mutashabih. Now you follow what the ulama are talking about. Muhkam, mutashabih means definitive, and mutashabih means ambiguous. Another way of saying that is, some on the ayat on the Quran are qat'iyyan, they're clear-cut, definitive, and some are dhanniya. Muhkam just means clear as day. Kitab uhkimat ayatuhu, clear. But that doesn't mean that there's some parts of the Quran are not mutashabih, are not ambiguous. The good news then, the mutashabihat, the ambiguous verses are limited. Very limited. That doesn't mean that it can't be dhanni, speculative. I'm talking about mutashabih like no one knows what it means. It can mean this, it can mean that, Allahu a'lam. No, there's no such, very few things. An example, what's something mutashabih only Allah knows? The kayfiyya of the sifat al-Rahman. We know Allah has a hand. How's the hand? That's mutashabih. Kayf. لا يعلم تأويله إلا الله. That's the correct interpretation. Only Allah knows the kayfiyya of His sifah. In terms of the meaning, وَرَاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. They know it. You see this ayah where it goes, the Al-Bid'ah, they went both ways here. What the ayah is saying us, does Allah have a hand? بَلْ يَدَاهُ مُبْسُوطَتَانِ. What is the hand like? لا يعلمه إلا الله. So that's a mutashabih. Wallahu a'lam, that one. Another example, Qiyamah. We know about Qiyamah is coming. When is it? لا يعلمه إلا الله. That's mutashabih. But everything else is clearly explained. That's why the rule is, any ayah which is ambiguous, you carry it upon the one that is clear cut. The reason why this is useful is that aqidah and fiqh you can do that. But in fiqh you're not going to find a lot of the ayat or are going to be arguing over mutashabih, because the ulama, besides the Hanafis, don't use mutashabih to refer to dhanniyat. You say dhanni, it means any ayah which can carry more than one meaning, it's up for ijtihad. And the reason I'm saying this is that because some people, they get really confused when they say the Quran is the book of Allah. One Lord who revealed the Quran, why difference of opinion? Anytime an ayah can carry more than one meaning, it's going to be up for ijtihad. The ulama are going to differ. They're going to take a stronger view or weaker view or majority view, minority view. So in the discussion of the Quran, most of us, when we go to the fiqh, you will always see ayat being quoted. When the ulama quote an ayah which is clear cut, most likely that ayah is going to lead to some kind of ijma'. When it's up for interpretation, dhanni just means it's like open to more than one interpretation. Do not be shocked that there's a ikhtilaf. And the reason why this is helpful to know, no one differs on the authenticity of the Quran, just the meaning. And the reason why Allah allowed some of that to be there is for what benefit? Because Allah knows the nature of mankind. Mankind, what's our nature? Do we differ more or do we agree more? We differ more. وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ. People will always be differing. So Allah, He knows. So some stuff He left it open for, and some stuff He made it qat'i for, and that's not differ over. How much salah we pray a day? 5. No one differ on that. Qat'i, right? Bunya al-Islam al-Khams, 5 pillars. And then we have the hadith in the Bukhari Muslim, 5 salah per day. What do we differ over? Maybe the timing, how to pray it, what nullifies the salah. We differ on those ones. No one's going to say, yeah, I guess my madhab says 6 salah. Right? If we get that different, we're in big trouble, right? Because there's nothing left. The same way the ummah doesn't differ about the Quran. We differ on the interpretation. So that's why when you think about the Quran, always remember the Quran is authentic. The difference may come in terms of its interpretation. We'll see an example of that later. The second discussion the ulama get into when talk about the Quran as evidence is the qira'at. And the rule is, anytime a qira'ah, a recitation of the Quran is authentic, then if it's considered authentic, then everyone will agree that it can be used as evidence. What does this mean? How many qira'at are there? How many recitations are there? Right? 10. Right? So scholars mentioned. Again, we're talking about the qira'at that we know of. Again, discussion of ahruf is outside of this. So the qira'at that we know of, there's 10 of them. Every one of them, if they're authentic, you can use it as evidence. So if you read it with the Maliki Yawmuddin or Maliki Yawmuddin, Maliki Yawmuddin is evidence, or Maliki Yawmuddin is evidence. Right? Qatilu wa qutilu, that's evidence. If you change the qira'ah, it's still evidence. As long as it's authentic. But then the question comes, the qira'ah which is not authentic like the other ones, qira'ah to shadh. This is ulum of the Quran now, but what does it mean? Any qira'ah which is authentic in chain, it's correct in Arabic, but unfortunately doesn't go with the Mus'haf Uthmani, Rasm Uthmani. Now, most of us know, if you study ulum of the Quran, that there's some qira'at, we don't read them anymore in salah. We don't use them in our ibadat because they go against Rasm Uthmani. So the Sahaba and Salaf just stopped using it for the most part. But in Usul of Fiqh, what do they say about those qira'at? Can you use an ayah and evidence from a qira'ah which is shadha? The rule is, yes. Every qira'ah, whether it's shadha or anomalous recitation or a valid or authentic recitation, all of it is allowed to be used as evidence. So to give you a summary, every qira'ah you can imagine is valid, is evidence. Why? Because they say that qira'ah which is shadha is like an ayah, like a hadith which is ahad. So to give you this, to make it easy for you, anything in the Quran is authentic from the Sahaba and Salaf, it's allowed to be used as evidence. And the reason why this is important, sometimes the evidences can be the way you read the ayah. Again, we're not looking at an example yet, but we're going to see. So the rule is, the qira'ah of the Quran, authentic, is valid. Again, going back to what I said, when the Quran, we don't talk about authenticity. Quran is authentic. If it's a qira'ah is authentic, accept it. If a qira'ah is shadha, it means authentic, but not Uthmanic, still allowed to be used. Why? It's because it's authentic. So the rule of the Quran is authenticity. The book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Sahaba, they narrate it authentically, then it's acceptable. Another example to give you this, we know when somebody fasts or made an oath and they broke their fast, broke their oath. Now they got to fast 3 days. A discussion of fiqh, do you fast 3 days in a row or 3 days separately? So many ulama say, well, you can do it 3 days in a row or you can do 3 days separately. So some ulama say it's better to do it 3 days in a row. Because they bring the qira'ah of Ibn Mas'ud, فَسِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ مُتَتَابِعَاتٍ. He has this wording in his qira'ah. So it's supposed to be فَسِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ, 3 days. But he has mutatabi'at in a row. So someone will say, you take that qira'ah and say it's better to do 3 in a row or 3 separately? Group of ulama say yes, another might say no. What's more correct? Yes, you can use it. Because we said the Quran is the Quran. If it's authentic from the Sahaba, if it's Quran, you can use it. And the reason why this is, again, there's limited examples of this, but that just shows you how a qira'ah which is authentic can implicate a different meaning or give you a different ruling. Any qira'ah which is not authentic, though, cannot be used. And what is an inauthentic qira'ah? When it goes against Arabic language or it's not authentic in its chain. So alhamdulillah, most of fiqh, you're not going to worry about that. So you don't have to worry too much about that because the difference of opinion there are not as many, but they do exist. We'll give you a couple more examples later. Another benefit, the Quran, because it's the book of Allah, we can discuss its meanings, its wordings, its used. The Quran has both wordings, or arguably the wordings, can they be divided in terms of their meanings into haqiqah wal majaz. To summarize this in this discussion, The origin is all the Quran, the ayat of the Quran, should be understood to be literal, not figurative, except with proof. And when we say proof, is that it can be proven and indicated by the language itself or the understood by its context. So take the Quran literally. It's the literal, the book of the Quran, because Arabic language is that way. And we understand it the way the Sahaba understood it. That's the benefit. We don't interpret the Quran in modern context. So we take an ayah, a word everyone knows, and we just say, okay, it means something else. Be careful of that, because some people today, they know what they're doing. They can't play with authenticity of the Quran, but you can try to play with its meanings, which leads to the last discussion related to this. The Quran gives us different realities or definitions. And this is very useful. The definitions in the Quran and Sunnah are 3 types. It's very important to know this because it will allow you to understand why sometimes there's a difference of opinion about what we're discussing. The ulama call it al-haqa'iq, but you can translate it as definitions or realities. But definition is the easier one to understand it. Every word has 3 possible definitions. And they use the word reality, but I think definition is easier to remember. Number 1, an Islamic legislative definition. So al-haqiqatu shar'iyya or Islamic definition. Okay, Islamic definition. Number 2, a customary definition. Al-haqiqatu al-urfiyya, but we're going to use the word, that definition. So we're going to say customary definition. What the people talk about or define it as. So not the Quran and Sunnah define it as, what the customs of the people define it as. And number 3, al-haqiqatu al-lughawiyya, the linguistic definition, what the language defines it as. If you understand this, you notice how ulama always begin the chapters talking about the linguistic definition and technical. You always wonder, what are they talking about there? This, for every Arabic word the Quran uses, there is a technical definition, but before that was a linguistic one. So the Quran builds. So that's what the ulama always start with linguistic. Why? To show you how the Quran and Sunnah changed the definition, added. What is the benefit behind this? When you get a word in the Quran and Sunnah, how should you interpret it? The rule is this. Any word found, okay, when it comes to the ibadat, okay, remember this. When it comes to ibadat, acts of worship, and when it comes to business transactions, always give preference to legislative definitions. When it comes to ibadat, wal-uqud, in business transactions, we give preference to the legislative definitions. What the Quran and Sunnah gave us a definition. When Allah said, praise salah, what does salah mean in Arabic? Dua. When Allah said, praise salah, what did He mean? The salah you pray. Aqimu salah, you're not going to go like this, right? If you did that, you'd be like, hey, you got it wrong. That's the wrong understanding. You're not wrong, but you're wrong. Yeah, you're wrong in the way you interpret it. Why did you go there? Because He said, well, salah means dua. Yes, but this is the ibadah. Ibadah, you go to Islamic definitions. See? The Sahaba, when they got the Quran and came to them from the Nabi, they knew what salah was in general. They didn't know but this way. So Nabi showed them how to pray salah. We already know this, many of us, right? Because when we look at the Quran and Sunnah, that's what we understand. The first thing comes to our mind. Same thing when it comes to uqud, the transactions. But then the ulama then say, when it comes to other things like people's words or the objects or entities, then we go to the linguistic definition. The word origin is when it comes to a'yan, entities, wal aqwal, and statements that people, we hold their words according to the linguistic definition. This is important, only we hold the linguistic definition if there's no customary definition. So to say it easier, people's words and the items, entities are to be interpreted customarily, otherwise linguistically. Customarily, otherwise linguistically. Customarily, otherwise. So if somebody said something in Arabic or English, and in the culture we're in, it means something, we hold it to the urf of the people before we hold it to the linguistic meaning. So when it comes to people's words and the statements and the objects and entities, you interpret them to be customarily, in a customary fashion, and otherwise, if there's no such thing, we go to the linguistic definition. And the ulama also said, also we can interpret people's speech based on their intention too. So if someone said something and he didn't mean that, his niyyah does count. So the benefit behind this is that there's a levels, right? The reason why the ulama spend time on this, some of the difference in opinion in fiqh go back to definitions. Example I gave you, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. What is this ayah talking about? Some of the ulama say, وَثِيَاب is just the thiyab that we know. So clothing. So it's going to be haqiqi, it's literal. Right? It's a literal word. And its meaning is going to be, because it's an object, it's going to be lughawi. Clothes. Purify your clothes. That's one interpretation. Second group of ulama said this wording is figurative, because Arabs can use the word thiyab to mean qalb. So what are they talking about here? It's talking about a legislative usage or a customary usage. Right? Arabs or linguistic, and another linguistic meaning, which is to mean your heart. Now they're not both wrong. Nobody's wrong here. But in terms of who's right in the better interpretation, is the one, should it be literal or should it be more figurative? So you can see the ulama say both are fine. But some say it's stronger to go with the literal. That's the safer one, to go literal. It means literally clothes. So the benefit we take from this is that you will notice sometimes the ulama, when they're discussing something, no one's worrying about the authenticity of the ayah. No one's arguing about the authenticity of the hadith. They're arguing over the definitions. That's a layer we're going to see later, a layer to go back to. This applies also to the Quran and Sunnah, both. طيب, that's enough on the Quran in general, because the Quran is a masdar most of the ulama agree to. Again, ijma' ulama, all of them agree to. Any faqih is going to agree to it. But the differences we're going to see come back to at times interpretations. To give one example of this is go back to what we said about the qira'at. Some of the qira'at that we said are acceptable, and some of the ulama they might not accept it. So because of this, there could be differences of opinion. So maybe we should give an example of that. Because if someone understands how different opinions are derived or where they result from, it becomes a lot easier then to appreciate, right, how to solve them. So I'll give you one example beyond the one we gave, inshallah ta'ala, and then we move on to the sunnah as much as we can. So we already gave one example. Let's take another example. Okay, so let's look at the ayah al-wudu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ayat al-wudu, He tells us when it comes to our feet, what are we supposed to do? Wash or wipe? Read the ayah. Hafs al-Asim, what's our qira'ah say? War jurikum with the kasra or the fatha? Kasra? So what does that mean then? So Allah is telling us, and your feet wipe. That's what we interpret as. But what is really saying? Your feet wipe, but it's supposed to be feet wash. So the qira'ah has two, one with the fatha, one with the kasra. Both of them are valid. So the way we're going to interpret then is, when it comes to your feet, if you have no socks, what do? Wash. If you have socks, you wipe. That's because we have two qira'ah, and one's fatha, one is kasra. Right? Some of you probably did this before, we looked at it before. That change in qira'ah has changed in ruling. The Shia come and they say you do wiping. Where did they get that from? First of all, we don't even care, right? Most of it, because they're not Ahl al-Fiqh, right? To go back to. So we're not going to look at their video. But where did they get it from? Zahir ayah. They're not going to accept the other qira'ah. They don't, right? So they're going to say the madhab of Shia Imamiyya is that taharatuhuma is masah, because Allah uses the kasra, not the fatha. The reason why this is beneficial for us, when they tell you that, you immediately know two things. Number one, where he got it from. And number two, why it's not correct. Because you know that he didn't accept, or their method didn't accept that qira'ah. Right? But then we also it's invalid because the jumhur majority accepted it. Khalas. Right? Arjulakum. Go back to Tafsir at-Tabari. He mentions both. Right? So that's a well-known benefit. And that just shows us the benefit that if there's an interpretation, a qira'ah, alongside the mainstream qira'ah, then we're going to take both of them, because what was the rule we said? Qira'ah, if it's authentic, it's hujjah. It's hujjah. So khalas, the ulama did jam'a, then we gathered them together, and they said, if kasra, it means masah ala jawribain or khufayn. So when someone said, what's the proof of wiping over the socks? Ayat al-wudu with the kasra. Washing, ayat al-wudu with fatha. Beautiful, right? Easy. That benefit is so simple, but so useful because there are many people that didn't know that. Right? So now you can explain to them. But what you actually got from this is better than that. You actually understood sabab al-khilaf. I get it now, where they're differing. So now you went from there to under the hood. I'm in the debate now, right? I'm in the conversation. What's going on here? Then you can ask a better question. Why does Imamiyya don't accept this qira'ah? What qira'ah they have, right? And did they even accept qira'at? Another bahath, you go another way. And then you find that something more amazing or strange. So you're going to keep going to Aqeedah. They're going to get out there. So this is one example. Easy. Inshallah ta'ala, we move now to what I said before. The most of the khilafat of the Quran, regarding to the Quran as evidence, is relation to its meanings. Let's talk about the Sunnah real quickly. Right? Whatever time's remaining. And maybe the rest we'll do later because we want to spend time in trying to understand the Sunnah. The Sunnah now is more detailed because the Sunnah, we said, explains the Quran more. Hence, the Sunnah, the ulama say, when we use the word Sunnah, what do we mean? The scholars of Usul al-Fiqh say, ما صدر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم غير القرآن. Whatever has come from Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم besides the Quran, ما صدر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم غير القرآن, whatever has come from Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم aside from the Quran, in relation to three things. من قول, in terms of statement, أو فعل, in terms of action, أو تقرير, in terms of approvals. Hence, whatever the Rasul came with, which is not the Quran, and it's a statement, an action, or an approval, it's called the Sunnah. Now, this is the ulama usul al-fiqh. Other ulama, they add things like wasf, descriptions, but we're not in that one. طيب, that's the Sunnah. So what's the rule then? Number one, the Sunnah is hujjah. All ulama agreed. Sunnah, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hujjah. It's proof. And it's part of obedience to him, alayhi salatu wasalam. So therefore, if you want to know Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Sunnah, we obey him by practicing Sunnah, and that includes fiqh. طيب, if you understand this then, what are some of the discussions that come? Some of the discussions that come have to do with categorizing the Sunnah, or have to do with the nature of the transmission. So let's use the same thing we talked about before. If the Quran is authentic in transmission, the Sunnah is two types, authentic in transmission and weak. So what do we use in the Usul al-Fiqh? Only the Sahih Hadith. Da'if Hadith can be used with conditions like the meaning is correct or established otherwise. But the rule is we only want authentic Hadith. Because you can't establish ahkam with da'if things. Because it just means it's not strong enough to mean it came from Allah's Messenger. So that's the difference between the Quran and Sunnah. Quran we never check, is ayah is in the Quran or not. No, it's Quran. Sunnah we have to check. So once you authenticate it, or the ulama say it's authentic, second step. What's its meaning? Meaning can be qat'i or dhanni. It could be definitive or speculative. Hence the same issue before. A lot of the difference of opinion in the Sunnah comes from what is the meaning of the hadith. What is the meaning of the hadith? So why am I saying this? You will never find an alim from ulama ahl sunnah jama'ah saying that this hadith we don't accept it. They don't say that. Just again, some mischaracterization of ulama. What they will always say is this hadith, its meaning they differ over. Its application they differ over. But they're not going to differ over its hadith unless they think it's weak. So if they differ with authenticity, one nature. So now if someone were to tell you why ulama differ in hadith, or why some madhab didn't use this hadith, number one, they didn't agree it's authentic. Number two, they differ in its meaning. Number three, they might have agreed it's authentic and its meaning is valid, except there's another evidence that restricts it. So they have another evidence, so they came and gave it something different. So those are three of many reasons. Number one, they didn't agree it's authentic, and that's a lot. Number two, they agree it's authentic but differ in its meaning. What does it mean? And number three, they accept the meaning of authenticity, but the application, they restricted it based on another evidence. For example, can you use the Quran to restrict the Sunnah? Yes. Can you use the statement of a Sahabi to restrict the Sunnah? Yes. as we're going to see later. So why am I saying this? Because some people, they have a black and white world. They say, how come the ulama rejected the hadith? Yeah, Shaykh, no alim is going to reject the hadith, sahih. Because we go to the Muqaddimah, Sifat Salat al-Albani, all the imams said, the Sah al-Madhab, hadith for madhabi. The hadith sahih is my madhab. So what's the benefit? We got to be more careful. We got to wake up. So Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah has a nice book, Raf' al-Malam an A'immat al-A'lam. If you read that book, he tells you why different madhabs did not take the hadith. And he mentions things like they didn't know about the hadith, they weakened the hadith, the difference meaning. He gives you like 3-4 meanings, explanations as to why there's difference. It's a beautiful book. It really calms down the anxiety, like why, for example, the Hanif madhab didn't take the hadith. The better question should be, if nobody took the hadith, that's a good question too. And there's actually another rule. If you find that there's a hadith sahih, and most of the ulama didn't use it, what does that really tell us? It's disputable, its authenticity. It's a rule, right? If majority of the ulama didn't agree with the hadith, probably not authentic. Because we're talking about Ahmad, Shafi'i, and big ulama. Sometimes we get confused a little bit. The mutaakhirin might have made sahih, but the mutaqaddimin, they have maybe something else to say on it. So you have to go to that chapter first and come back. I'm saying this because it's humility, right? Somebody comes and say, hadith sahih. Not hadith, you don't know, Ahmad didn't know, right? You have to be more humble and say, well, why Ahmad didn't take it? That's the question. You have to be humble, right? Why Ahmad didn't take it? Not, I only follow the hadith. This language, we have to move from it. Everyone follows the hadith. But the benefit now, if you think the hadith is sahih, you stick to it. That's okay. That's okay because that's part of fiqh. But we don't want to be like, we just becoming very dismissive of the early scholars. A lot of the conversation, the sunnah has little to do with what we're trying to talk about because it has to do with ulum al-hadith. So we're going to skip it. Ahad, wal-mashhur, wal-mutawatir, those are mabahith in ulum al-hadith. We're going to skip it. What's the summary? If a hadith is sahih, mutawatir or ahad, فهو hujjah. That's it. If a hadith is sahih, mutawatir or otherwise, it's hujjah. That's it. So Ahl Sunnah, we don't ask the question, mutawatir or ahad. No. Sahih, that's all we ask. And then we go with it. And again, you can differ on authenticity, but that's the first thing. So the reason I'm saying that is because some of the books of fiqh, they go into depth. Mutawatir, ahad, mashhur. Ulum al-hadith. We're just going to say, so hujjah, go with it. We take it. طيب. The sunnah then, we said is of 3 types. What was it? Statement, action, and approval. Each one of these has a unique application. Most of the sunnah is what? Qawliyan, statements. Means Nabi Sallallahu telling us things. Then there's the af'al, fi'liyan, what he did. Then taqreerat, what he approved. So when you look to Usul al-Fiqh, where are you going to get most of the detailed principles? What does the Prophet's words mean? So, and then the second one, what does his actions mean? And the third one, what does his approvals mean? But most of them are his meanings of his statements. So when you look at that one, you're going to see it's a big discussion. Later we're going to get to it because both the Quran and Sunnah have the shared rules as to how to interpret words. In terms of actions, we can give a quick summary for that because the other one will come later. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he does something, how do we interpret it? To make it easy, if he did something out of his own natural habit or as a human nature, then we say this indicates what? This would indicate permissibility. That's rule number 1. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam drank cold water in the morning with honey. That was his favorite drink. What is that proof? Al-ibaha. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he used to grow long hair. What does that prove? Permissibility. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he used to walk fast. Generally, that's his habit. That means it's permissible. And then, of course, sometimes we're not sure which one it is. So we're going to go to the next one. But why I'm telling you that? We said last week, some sunnah are sunnah of customs. There you go. So now, if I'm growing long hair, am I doing the sunnah? Sunnah adiyah. Because that action the Prophet did he grow it for ibadah or did he grow it for customs? That's the question you're going to ask. Number 2 now, the statement where the Prophet ﷺ did something and it proves that it's only for him. It's unique to him. Only he's allowed to do it. That one, the ulama say, you're not allowed to follow him in it because it's specific to him. So this is called the khasa'is in Rasul, special qualities that only he has. Like him marrying more than 4 wives. Right? Some people say, mashallah, sunnah. Right? If you go there, you're going to end up Khawarij. Because the Khawarij believe you can marry 9 wives. Right? Because, mathna wa thulat wa ruba', 1, 2, 3, put together 9. Astaghfirullah. That's a khawarij. You can never, see the problem with the guys, this kind of stuff. We know it's subhan al-ahlam. Where are we going with that? If somebody in Africa said Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it, and this is a problem, some cultures, they think it's sunnah. Because the ayah says one thing, Rasulullah did something else. So how are you going to answer it? You're going to say, brother, you're right and wrong at the same time. You're right that he did it, alayhi, but you're wrong in your evidence. Because some people didn't know this. They never knew this sort of thing as khasa'is. Another example, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we know, for example, in one part of the ummah, or the sharia, seerah, he used to pray qiyam al-layl wajib on him, then Allah made it sunnah. So he some things he has to do. Wisal, he can do it. He can make it fast all the way to next Fajr. We can't. Okay. That one we're not allowed to follow him. Third one. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did something where it is clearly an ibadah. Then that action will be considered an ibadah, and it depends on what it's clarifying. So he did something which is known to be either wajib, recommended, or permissible. So therefore we ruled that action to be either wajib, recommended, or permissible, based on what the Quran and Sunnah, or his words, or the ayah and the Quran say. Example, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did i'tikaf. I'tikaf is recommended, because Allah tells us to do i'tikaf. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did i'tikaf, it's still recommended. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for example, he used to pray tahajjud, recommended. Allah tells us in Surah Muzammil to do tahajjud. He did it. Mustahab. Ayah says mustahab. So nice, very simple. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he did something permissible, then it means permissible. Another example, he did something to clarify something the Quran talked about. So there's something in the Quran that's not clear, but Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did the clarification. So that would be then explanation, explanatory sunnah. A simple example, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Establish salah. How do you pray salah? Nabi Sallallahu told us, the man pray poorly, stand up, face to Qibla, say Allahu Akbar, then read Fatiha. He explained it. When he did it, when he got on the minbar, he showed us. It was mujmal, and it was obscure, and he made it mubayyin, clear. The reason why this is useful, whenever we don't know how to do something, go to the sunnah. Because he's going to tell you, his job is to explain. So sometimes we get caught up in some things in the Quran. What does this mean? Go to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. مَا أَتَاكُمْ رَسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. He's going to clarify. So in his sunnah, he has to clarify things. So in a simple example will be, imagine we're trying to find out how to give zakat. All we have to check is what the Rasul did and said. He's going to tell us. We don't have to worry about, for example, the generality of the word. His job is to clarify. The last one, the scholars will differ over. If any action, we don't know if he did it as an action of customs or natural habit or ibadah. Which one should we prefer? So some things Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did, we don't know if he did out of ibadah or did out of adah. It's customary for him to do it, or it's an ibadah he's showing us. Here the scholars, they differ. And what's more correct, wallahu a'lam, we should hold it to be a ibadah. Take it because his job in general is to clarify the deen. So if he did something, the asr will be, it's a qurbah. It's a drawing near to Allah. We should interpret it this way until proven otherwise. So how do we know when the Prophet grew his long hair, it wasn't ibadah? Anyone can show us why we know that growing long hair is not ibadah and it's just a custom? What evidence do we have? Good. The Sahabi had long hair and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told him to better to trim it. Or that it mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim that the Jews and Christians used to part their hair one way, he did it that way, then later he used to agree first with the Mushrikeen, then he agreed with the Ahl Kitab. So he's changing the hairstyle based on the customs. He didn't want to agree with the Mushrikeen more than Ahl Kitab. Ahl Kitab are close to the Haqq. So he's changing hairstyle based on customs. That means it's customary. Okay, let's give an example of in ibadah. Al-Jalsatu al-Istiraha fi salah. If you go to Sifat Salah al-Albani, what does he say? Jalsatu al-Istiraha, the sitting after first rak'ah for rest, he says it's sunnah, right? The other opinion amongst the ulama, it's aada. Nabi says it's old. It's a practical example. Many ulama don't mention this in their Sifat Salah. Shaykh Albani took it to be sunnah. Okay, now you're going to explain why. Where's the sabab khilaf? Where's the difference of opinion here? Fi'al Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in ibadah, asal is ibadah. But this time, we have a context, something showing that he sat because he was an old man at that time. How do we know? Malik bin Huwayrith, when he came to him, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was senior in age, towards the end of his life. So he sat like that because he was older, so he needed to take a little break before getting up. So the ulama say, if you're old or you need to break, then you do it. Why? Because it said this is an ad or just something customary for older people. The other group of scholars say, no, it's sunnah. Why? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to Malik bin Huwayrith, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. He said, right after he finished, he said, Malik, pray you see me praying. So the other group said, but he didn't mean that part. The other group said, no, he meant that part. So you see, this now the debate is going on. What is action happening here? The other group responds, all the hadith show simple salah, it doesn't mention that, illa Malik bin Huwayrith. So they say all the hadith of simple salah, the only one that says the Jalsa Salah is his hadith. So how can we say this is not the Prophet older now? The other group responds and says that even the Prophet, if he knew this, it's not allowed for him to delay explanation time in need. So you should have told him that this part don't do. So you see now it gets interesting, right? Now you can look at both sides. Some of us are probably shocked. I didn't know it's even a debate, right? But if you read the books, now you get it. Right? Shaykh Al-Albani, he has a strong opinion, right? And again, he shows you where he got it from. He knows what he's doing. But when me and you look at both sides, like, mashallah, this is a beautiful discussion. But the benefit is you're not going to be on somebody's case because you have to first know why they differed. But the more safer view is that if he did it in the ibadah, or we're not sure if it's ibadah or it's adah, it's better to carry his ibadah. And some ulama say this is true, except if we have proof otherwise. Anyways, last sunnah for today and last discussion. The one that some people forget, the sunnah to tarkiyyah. Very important sunnah. The sunnah of abandonment. A sunnah to tarkiyyah is a sunnah that we need to study today and revive and explain. And some ulama have pushed it heavily in books saying the difference between bid'ah and sunnah is here. When you talk about what Rasul did, we said qawl, fi'l and taqreer. A sunnah to tarkiyyah is the sunnah of the things Prophet did not do. He could have done, but he chose not to. So the definition would be anything. Okay, it's very important, the definition, to understand what is sunnah tarkiyyah. So the general meaning, he didn't do it. But he could have done it, but he didn't. Not he could have done it because it's not possible. For example, Nabi Sallallahu didn't use microphone. There's no microphone. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something he could have done. So, kullu shay'in, anything. Kullu shay'in, anything. Wujida sababuhu, in which its cause existed. Wujida sababuhu, its sabab, its cause existed. في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, in the lifetime of Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم. كل شيء وجد سببه في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Anything whose cause existed or its means existed in the lifetime of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, so far we're here. وَلَمْ يَفْعَلْهُ, but he didn't do it. وَلَمْ يَفْعَلْهُ, but he didn't do it. مع وجود, with the presence, al-muqtadi lahu. What does that mean? He didn't do it despite the need or the reason for it to be done. So any sabab, any cause that existed at the time of Rasulullah, and he didn't do it. Okay, so far we're here. مع وجود المقتضي له. مقتضي له means the reason for him to do it, the motive existed. وَالِانْتِفَاءِ الْمَوَانِعِ, and the preventatives were absent. These last parts are so important. مع وجود المقتضي له, the reason for him, the motive was present. وَالِانْتِفَاءِ الْمَوَانِعِ, and the preventatives were absent. So he could have done it. He didn't do it, even though there was a reason and no preventative. Nothing to stop him. فَتَرْكُهُ السُنَّةِ, then not doing it is also sunnah. Because whatever he sallallahu alaihi wasallam left off for a reason, should be left off for a reason. And whatever he left off because it didn't exist, doesn't mean you can't do it when it exists in your time. Simple example. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam for Salatul Eid, there's no iqama wala adhan. Okay, follow this example. Simple one. The Sunnah, the Eid, no adhan wala iqama. Right, so you notice that we straighten the lines and we just pray. So someone will say, okay, why? All the hadith said Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the Eid, he didn't do it. Was there a muqtadi lahu? Was there a reason for it? Lots of people are coming, they're scattered. He could have said, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. No, he didn't do it. There's a reason there. Was there preventative to stop him? Like Bilal was absent that day? Right? No, he was there. They didn't do it. So therefore, leaving off is sunnah. And if you do that, then it's considered bid'ah. That's one of the one of the definitions of bid'ah is this one. And one of the many ulama hang on this one. Anything the Prophet ﷺ could have done in his lifetime when the reason existed and the preventative was absent, yet he didn't do it, is sunnah to leave it and to do it as bid'ah. Hence, in today's time when the ulama say we shouldn't do this, and some people are shocked, why brother? This is bid'ah. Why is it bid'ah? Nabi ﷺ didn't do, but we can do. We said to him, did it exist at the time of Rasul ﷺ, this cause? Did a motive exist? Was there preventative to stop him? No. He didn't do it, then you don't do it. Sunnah Tarkiyah teaches us that Nabi ﷺ's inaction is an action. Not doing is something. And you need to pay attention to this because sometimes this discussion gets really heated. Because the ulama differed on this heavily. What's a bid'ah, not bid'ah, goes here. And some ulama have their own interpretation of bid'ah or different definitions, so sometimes they're debating definitions. So it's a tug of war on definitions. But Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah indicated towards this in Iqtida Sirat al-Mustaqim, and many of our contemporary and past scholars, they hold on to the same principle. Now, the reason why this is beautiful is that anytime you want to follow the sunnah, from the sunnah is not to do what's not the sunnah. That's it, all right? So what benefit from this is that the sunnah of Rasulullah is to be taken as hujjah in the categorizations we learned today. At times, we can learn that the differences in fiqh go back to the sunnah. Let's just give one example when we finish to show how this will be applied in actual fiqh. Right? How would it be applied? So let's give the example of a hadith that exists but it's weak, or the scholars differ on authenticity. One example is wiping the head in wudu 3 times. So the sunnah of wiping the head is how many times? 1. Now some of the ulama differed and said it's recommended to do more than 1, either 2 or 3, depending on how many times you do the rest of it. If you do 1 for each, 1. If you do 2 of all body parts, the head gets 2. If it's 3, it's 3. And some say 3 by itself, a tathrith, and they bring a hadith. What is the difference of opinion on this? It goes back to a narration that was reported. And so they bring a hadith that shows, the hadith of Uthman, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wiped the head 3 times. Well, why the other scholars didn't take it? They said the hadith is da'if, and they opposed the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Another thing they also differed, they said that the hadith about tawadda'a marra, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made wudu everything 1 time, or marratain 2 times, or thalathan 3 times each, is a hadith was general. But the hadith that comes about the simple wudu said the head did once, and the ear once. So he says he washes his face 3 times, hands 3 times, head once, ears once, then feet 3 times. So they said, look at the numbers. So that hadith clearly shows 1. So if you find some books of fiqh saying 3 times for the head, you're going to see that they differ on the hadith. That's it. That shows that no one's going to differ that the hadith is not proof. That's the differ on the authenticity of that hadith. Another example would be washing the beard in wudu. Same discussion. Takhreer al-lihya fi salah. Same discussion. Why? Because some ulama differ on the hadith. Let's give another example. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's actions. Right? These actions himself, alayhi salam, are they to be taken which way? How do we interpret them? So we said Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's actions are to be taken as ibadah. But sometimes the ulama differ then. If it's an ibadah, does it indicate wujub or does it indicate sunnah? Okay, simple example. رفع اليدين في الصلاة. Raising the hands in salah. What's the ruling on it? It's sunnah. So majority of ulama said that. The Zahiriyya said it's fard. Okay, so where are they differing here? What's the difference opinion on? Sunnah. Okay, it's hujjah. Next step. Where are they differing on? Hadith. They get to the hadith. We're all on the same hadith. We're using the same hadith. Sahih. Okay, good. Sahih hadith. Next. Interpretation. They're saying the interpretation is fard. Where are they getting it from? They're saying that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he did it, but when you look at his ibadah, he always used to do it. Right? So they're saying that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he used to do it, and his actions in ibadah are to be done because he never left it off. Which is one of the definitions to know if something is fard or not. But the other scholars are going to say it's not fard because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, number 1, in the hadith man who prayed poorly, he taught us the arkan Okay, the arkan are there. Wajibat, you need something clear wording. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it, but he never commanded it. So we're going to interpret as something recommended. Because if you want to say it's wajib, you need something definitive. You can't use indications, because wajib means it's sinful if we don't. So the jumhur are safer in calling it sunnah because we don't have any clear wordings of command. So what is the Zahiriyya left with? Actions of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And what is the action of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? You can interpret his actions as being sunnah or wajib. When is the ihtimal, possibility, we can weaken the evidence to lower it. So khalas, the correct opinion is sunnah, safer to say this. The benefit we take from all of this is that when you look at all of this, you can start noticing that where the differences are. And next week we'll talk about, inshallah ta'ala, the qiyas and the ijma', and then we'll move on from there. Anyone has any quick questions, inshallah ta'ala? We'll take it. Yes. Inshallah. So good, washing the beard. And the brother said, can we say it's part of the face, hence it's something legislated? So they differed by looking at, number one, there's a hadith specific on it. So some differ on the authenticity of the hadith. And as some of them, they said, as you said, that even if it's not a hadith, then it comes in the generality of the face. Now the other difference is it wajib or not? Then it got into another difference. So we agreed that it's definitely recommended, but the real difference is not wajib. So Malik, some of his madhab, they say it's wajib because they say فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. The wajh is general. The other group said it's not wajib. Why? Because they said that if it's the part that's on your face, wajib. The one that's below your face, not wajib. Because the wajh has a dynamic. So that's where they went. So the benefit we take from this is that then they bring the hadith. The Prophet he washed his beard. The one that's below is like the long part of the beard. So that's the thing, you're going to just find these differences. But the reason why it's important to know all this, later when you go to fiqh, when you look at what the different opinions on, you're going to just find out where they're differing. Then you follow the principles that you know and you get the correct opinion. If there's some discussions or no evidence to begin with, then it's going to be really interesting because nobody has evidence. No one has anything clear cut. So what are they going to do? Everyone's going to bring what they believe to be stronger. Ta'lilat. Someone's going to use this opinion. So what's the beauty about fiqh is that when there's a difference, the real fiqh is not to know the difference of opinion. The ulama like Shatibi mentioned others. The real faqih, the real mujtahid, he knows the sabab ikhtilaf. You know where the difference is going down. If you want to be a mujtahid, you have to know where it is, pinpoint where the things are going down. Because if you can do that, then you have the skin in the game. You're in the game. You're in the field. If you just sit in there, ikhtilaf, everyone knows ikhtilaf. He said mu'tabar, not mu'tabar. And we're going to see later, ijma' and ikhtilaf go hand in hand. When there's ikhtilaf, it already means there's no ijma'. Because haram to have ikhtilaf amam al-ijma'. And haram to do ikhtilaf amam al-nas. As we learn later. So one of the beauties behind this is that we're going to start going closer to being better able to defend the correct opinions, inshallah ta'ala. And the last question, otherwise we'll finish the last one. Shadha, yeah. Yes, so yeah. So good. So the ulama say when it comes to qira'at, which are shadh, that those qira'at, they're authentic, but they go against Rasm Uthmani. Hence, after the establishment of Ijma' al-Sahaba, they started to use those qira'at for other benefits, either tafsiriyya, explanation purposes, for evidence, or for wording to benefit in terms of deriving rulings. But in terms of ibadat, they left it off. Either some ulama earlier said you can use it, but many fuqaha say not, because after the Sahaba unified with Uthman's Mus'haf, they stick with it, to bring unity. So then it becomes then a ijma' of them later. And that's the better way. But so the difference between two is that what you can do in salah is different when you turn to interpretation. Because we're not saying it's not Quran. We're just saying now when you're reading, they avoid it for many reasons. One of the problems they can cause. And right now, even the qira'at, people don't know. Imagine qira'at shadda. People, they're just going to beat you. And you have no idea what you read, right? It could even create serious fitna, right? And that's why it's not hikmah. But today, the ulama mentioned after this, you should avoid that. But there is a discussion, right? Is the salah valid? That's a different discussion. But the way that we use these then is that their benefit for the interpretation and for explanation. Hence, go to any tafsir book and the qira'at are there, including the ahruf even, the earlier recitations. And it's a useful benefit, showing Allah revealed it for wisdom. But it doesn't mean it's a must to recite it, because there's a hadith sahih that says that every recitation, all the ahruf we have, if you memorize one of them or you preserve one of them, it counts for all of them. So that would also mean that we're not losing the Quran necessarily, but we're using it in a more specific way for a greater benefit. And we'll talk about that maybe later, and when it's said the daraya, why did that happen? Why did that stop happening? We're closing that door for a reason. بارك الله فيكم. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.